For the first time in American history, a former president of the United States and candidate for president is being prosecuted by the Justice Department run by his political opponents. For the first time in history, Democrat activists across the country are using novel legal theories in political prosecutions against Donald Trump. A legal drama has been created that could alter the course of our country, setting precedents for future political prosecutions. And it could have immediate impact on the 2024 election as the trials have become political ammunition in the campaign, framing Trump as both a criminal and a threat to democracy.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing.
And though Jack Smith's October release of January 6 accusations was called a cheap shot and a violation of Justice Department policy, no case has been so patently political as Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's prosecution of Donald Trump. Chasing Trump 2, Alvin Bragg's weaponization of justice. It was a case many legal experts thought should never have been prosecuted based on paperwork violations, now being used in the presidential campaign against Donald Trump.
This Soros-funded Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, campaigned on the fact that he was going to get Trump, right? And this was such a bogus, ridiculous legal theory that even Alvin Bragg declined to bring this case after he campaigned on getting Trump. The prior Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, a Democrat, declined to bring this case. The Federal Election Commission declined to bring a case. The Manhattan U.S. Attorney, under both Obama and Trump, who was picked by the Democrat judges in the Southern District of New York, declined to bring this case. This is a bogus case.
And it's almost like a black ops operation here. It was a tawdry, secretive, manipulative perversion of the system, which was designed to topple Donald Trump. And it will backfire because the public, I think, is going to be even more supportive of Donald Trump.
Even those on the left call it a case of politics gone wrong.
The trials against him keep him in the spotlight, infuriate his base, who sees him as a martyr, and even may serve to make him the object of some sympathy among people in general who believe that his prosecutors are politically motivated. This happens to be true, in my opinion. I doubt the New York indictment would have been brought against a defendant whose name was not Donald Trump.
The trial in New York, the one he got convicted for, was the greatest fundraising bonanza ever.
That case, the Attorney General's case in New York, frankly, should have never been brought. And if his name was not Donald Trump, and if he wasn't running for president, I'm the former AG in New York, I'm telling you that case would have never been brought. And that's what is offensive to people. And it should be, because if there's anything left, it's belief in the justice system.
This Trump trial in New York City was a partisan, corrupt, and rigged process by President Biden and his allies to railroad President Trump for non-crimes in New York and to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. It is lawfare. It is election interference.
Highly respected Democrat attorney David Boies said, "The hurdle to sue a former president ought to be pretty high. The idea of prosecutors in one party criminally prosecuting a former president of a different party is something that, except in really unusual circumstances, is better left to other countries."
These four prosecutions of, first of all, a former president of the United States, and second of all, the leading candidate for United States president in this election cycle, are a total abuse of power. They're abuse of power by the sitting president. They're abuse of power by Soros-funded prosecutors who are completely out of control and out of line.
There's no question it's an abuse of power. Prosecutors are supposed to follow the facts and apply the facts fairly and objectively to the conduct at issue. This was a made-up case which had never been brought against anybody, much less Donald Trump, against anybody in the entire history of the United States. This case, the application of this statute to this type of transaction has never been made before. It was designed to get one person, Donald Trump. And let me tell you something, if you can get Donald Trump on it, if a rogue prosecutor such as Alvin Bragg wants to get you or me or anybody else, all they have to start doing is start looking through all of your books and records and trying to find something that they disagree with and charging you with a crime. It's absolutely absurd.
So why are these prosecutors doing this? Well, I think they expect to be rewarded politically. You know, they're at the entry level, they're hoping to move up the ranks, and they are carrying water for somebody else. Who is that somebody else? I think that somebody else lives in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Or you could call it the Democratic National Committee or Democratic Party leaders, whoever that is.
But it's not just Bragg who is being questioned about abusing the system. Matthew Colangelo, a senior Justice Department official in the Biden-Harris administration, has led the prosecution of the case.
Let's talk about Matthew Colangelo, this Obama and Biden political appointee who went to Soros-funded Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's office to bring these bogus charges 7 years after the fact to directly interfere in the 2024 presidential election. I've been a lawyer for nearly 20 years and I've served in the Justice Department. I've never heard of someone going from a senior post in the Justice Department that Matthew Colangelo had to go to a local DA's office to bring an unprecedented indictment against a former president and likely future president of the United States. Matthew Colangelo held the same political post that Justice Neil Gorsuch did under the Bush 43 administration. Neil Gorsuch went on to the Supreme Court. Matthew Colangelo went to a dingy DA's office.
I think it's transparently political. I think it was targeted to get Trump and only get Trump. When a prosecutor campaigns on a platform for his office to, quote, get Trump, then takes office and takes up a case that everybody else has rejected, including the federal authorities, how could you conclude otherwise, other than it's political? It's clearly political. And who's the big supporter of DA Alvin Bragg? George Soros, the left-wing billionaire who's hell-bent on destroying this country and undermining the sanctity of our institutions. That's who's behind this.
So there's clearly a high-level strategy here, and it's a political one. And that's apparent from the involvement of a senior federal prosecutor. And so, you know, why would a federal prosecutor at the senior level at the Department of Justice be involved in a books and records violation in New York where the prosecutor didn't even commit to any particular federal crime being the predicate that would convert it from a misdemeanor to a felony? There's no good reason for that. I think it just points directly to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's what it does.
At the heart of the case, led by Biden-Harris prosecutor Colangelo, are shadowy key figures, Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. Stormy Daniels is an adult film actress who claims to have had encounters with ghosts and haunted dolls.
Stormy's doll, Susan, was purchased in 2011 and is said to be cursed with a uniquely malevolent spirit.
Yes, 3 people that I slept with in a row she attacked. She's more mischievous than malicious.
Not only that, Stormy Daniels has a history of lying, changing her story, and making sensationalized media appearances for profit and personal gain.
She went into this trial, and this judge and these prosecutors allowed her to give wholly irrelevant and unfairly prejudicial testimony that tainted the trial. It couldn't be fixed with jury instructions. A mistrial should have been declared immediately.
And after trying to sue President Trump for defamation, Daniels lost the case, still owing Trump hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And so where we come into the picture is my law firm was hired to handle the tail end of these 2 cases. And Because she persisted in frivolous litigation in state and federal court in California, she ended up owing President Trump over $600,000 in attorney's fees that my law firm obtained for President Trump. And to date, she hasn't paid that money. So someone who owes somebody else money has a motivation to testify a certain way about them. They have a bias. And that bias was brought out in a limited fashion in the trial here.
But the cross-exam, boy, her responses were disastrous. I mean, do you hate Donald Trump? Yes, of course she does. That's a big deal. When the witness hates the person whose liberty is at stake, that's a big damn deal. And she's putting out tweets, fantasizing about him being in jail. That really undermines the credibility. The fact that she owes him $500,000, she, by order of a court, owes Donald Trump $500,000 and said, I will never pay him. I will defy a court order. The defense is going to say she's willing to defy a court order. Why? She's not willing to respect an order of a judge. Why is she going to respect this oath she took?
Meanwhile, Michael Cohen is a convicted felon, guilty of tax evasion, bank fraud, lying to Congress, and even stealing from the Trump organizations.
The crux of the prosecution's case is Donald Trump knew what that $420,000 was for. It was for Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen read him in on all of it. He was fine with it. Turns out Michael Cohen was stealing from Donald Trump within that $420,000. And Donald Trump not only didn't know, he certainly never would have agreed to be robbed by Michael Cohen.
Cohen's history of deceit and self-serving actions paints a picture of a man willing to do anything to save himself, severely undermining his credibility and reliability as a witness.
There is all this testimony, there is all this evidence from Michael Cohen's phones seized by the FBI, and some of it is being used right now to show that Michael Cohen is currently not telling the truth.
I don't think I've ever seen a star cooperating witness get his knees chopped out quite as clearly and dramatically as what just happened with Michael Cohen.
This case is predicated upon the testimony of Michael Cohen. Now, the problem with using a Michael Cohen for any other prosecutor but Alvin Bragg is that Michael Cohen has been convicted and pled guilty to perjury. He's a professional perjurer. He has previously broken his attorney-client privilege with President Trump.
When you get an individual like Michael Cohen, who will say anything for $1.50 at any time about any issue, who has no soul, who has lied repeatedly and was known in the industry, that is the legal industry, of being just a tawdry, dishonorable, disrespectful individual, how could you possibly let that person get up on a witness stand against the President of the United States in front of a jury and spin his lies?
Critics of the prosecution continue to ask one question above all else. Where is the crime?
Where in the world is the crime here? The answer is there is none, which makes this an egregious abuse of the legal system targeting a political opponent.
I think the very biggest and most fundamental issue is the constitutional issue here. There's no way that you can take a New York penal code that calls for a misdemeanor and tie it to a federal statute that is completely unrelated and weave it so that the two, when combined, constitutes a felony under New York law for which you can be criminally prosecuted. Bear in mind, that federal statute was not violated by Donald Trump. The feds already scrutinized it and declined to go forward with it. There was no crime there. So to suggest that a, quote, false business entry under New York misdemeanor law in the private books of Donald Trump, where there's no victim and there's no reliance by anybody, can somehow constitute a crime for which you could lose your liberty, that's what due process is all about. Due process says you can't do that.
We're left on Friday wondering what's the intelligent design here towards conviction. And one thing that would help if you would just tell us what's the crime.
Alvin Bragg is using a former president of the United States as a test case for new novel legal theories in order to damage Trump's reputation and influence the election.
Technically, this theory's not novel. We've seen criminal prosecutions like this in third world Marxist hellholes, like North Korea and Zimbabwe. and now New York City. So their theory is bogus. It's novel. It's never been done before. We've never had a former president of the United States ever charged and tried under any criminal jurisdiction, federal or state or local, any time in American history until now against President Trump.
Setting aside President Trump, what we can say with certainty is that people do not get prosecuted for paperwork violations, which are alleged here. CEOs don't get prosecuted for getting the QuickBooks entries wrong in their companies because they don't do the QuickBooks. And so, first of all, nobody does get prosecuted for that. But prosecuting a former president for these minor misdemeanor, by the way, termed out from the statute of limitations violations, and trying to convert them into a felony offense is a disgrace to the rule of law.
Let's remember, this is the first time in U.S. history that this kind of a prosecution has been leveled against any person, any elected official, much less an ex-president of the United States. So now we have a novel theory that's never been applied before, that's been stretched and turned and abused in such a way semantically as to try to make out some kind of a federal felony offense, and it's absurd. There's no question but that this prosecution was specifically tailored to Donald Trump and Donald Trump only. And the constitutionality of the application of the penal code is especially dubious here, because inherent in the Constitution, inherent in the notion of due process, is the idea that an actor, a person, someone who's in business, is supposed to be on notice that if they do a particular act, it could be a criminal violation.
There is no question that the only reason that this Soros-funded Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg and this former top Biden political appointee at the Justice Department, Matthew Colangelo, brought this unprecedented indictment and trial against President Trump for the non-crime of a businessman settling a nuisance claim. The only reason they did this is because President Trump is running for president.
But Bragg is not alone. Judge Merchan is a political donor to Joe Biden, and his daughter is a Democratic political fundraiser. This involvement of such a close family member with financial stake in this case caused an obvious bias and more than enough to warrant a recusal in this case.
Judge overseeing the case against former President Donald Trump is now facing new scrutiny tonight after political donations that he made to Democrats came to light.
As a lawyer, I was embarrassed to see the conduct of this court. First of all, New York should not have assigned a relatively inexperienced judge to all of the cases involving accusations against President Trump's circle, including Steve Bannon and another case involving President Trump. And it is crazy that a judge who is violating the canons of judicial ethics by making political contributions, which they're not supposed to do in New York, was able to sit on this political case. There is very clear law in New York that requires judges to recuse themselves when a family member within 6 degrees of relation has an economic interest in the outcome of this case. In this case, the judge's daughter, Lauren, is within 1 degree of him, and she is making tens of millions of dollars, or her company is, off of direct mail by Democrat politicians involving the outcome of this case.
This has nothing to do with justice or fairness. Merchan is a get Trump judge. He's trying to do as much harm to Trump as he can, consistent with his own reputation.
And while Trump's team appeals the case, the judicial process is a slow and winding road. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris and the Democrats use the Bragg case to prosecute Trump in the election.
So that's going to be appeal issue number 1. I was never put on specific notice of what I was being tried for. Appeal argument number 2 is going to be this. One of the bases for conviction here, one of the unlawful means, is a violation of the Federal Election and Campaign Act. Do you know how many times, Michael, we have ever had in the history of this country a state or county level prosecutor charge either as a charge or a subcomponent or an unlawful means or any part of a charge a violation of federal campaign law? The answer was 0.
Probably
now
never.
It's 1. So this is the first Right, exactly. This is the first time in American history that's been done. And the appeals argument will be when you have a federal regulatory structure around elections, that's for the feds to violate. That's not for state, or in this case, county. Alvin Bragg is a county level prosecutor to enforce, because that would lead to mayhem and that would create problems for federalism, for the notion that federal law has to, no pun intended, trump state and local law.
This case could set a dangerous precedent for the American political landscape. Traditionally, the U.S. justice system has maintained a careful balance to avoid the appearance of politically motivated prosecutions.
What does this mean to our country? What this means to our country is that we now live in the United States of America that looks like the countries I have visited over the years and that we have lectured for years about rule of law, a place where the court system is weaponized. It is used to go after political opponents and the people who work for them with a very clear message. If you stand in our way, we are going to make your life a misery. And that's what I think we need to fear now, is that there are plenty of Democrats, Soros, left-wing Marxist prosecutors prepared to charge people on the right with crimes in order to get them out of politics. And that's a very scary place to be. I never thought I would live in the United States of America that had that feature of its politics. That's where we are now. That's the line these people have crossed.
Well, I've said from the beginning, this case is an abomination. You know, it's obviously political. 7 years after he pays hush money to try to come up with this case. It's also, as you say, it's not only far-fetched, they're trying to predicate it on a federal crime, which wasn't prosecuted, and they're wrong about it. This was not a campaign contribution. They're just wrong on the law. But to me, this shows that the real threat to liberty, the real threat to our system, are the excesses of the progressive left. They're perverting the system of justice, and you know that's where the danger lies: the corruption and subversion of our institutions by the left.
This is a garbage political prosecution. If you're going to prosecute a former president of the United States and potentially arrest the guy and mugshots and the whole thing, and you want to indict him for a crime, this is not the way to do it. And I think a lot of Americans would see this as nakedly cynical and political, because it would be nakedly cynical and political.
I think there's a large number of Americans who are going to see this as the politicization of and the weaponization of the enforcement agencies. And I think it's going to hurt. It's bad for our democracy. I think the Democrats feel like they have, the DNC feels like it has a candidate that cannot win fair and square in the polls. And so they have to win in the courts.
Alvin Bragg ran he was a partisan. He was a partisan Democrat running to get elected. And his campaign promise was, I am going to get one of my political opponents. That is just banana republic stuff. That should not happen in America. And if it isn't troubling, in this case, it should be troubling because it's going to happen again and again and again. Once the door is opened in these kind of things, it's a slippery slope to the next person. I mean, everybody should be concerned about this.
The unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States on a campaign finance issue is outrageous. The details that will follow will not change that fact. I think millions of Americans looking on see this for what it is. It's a political prosecution by a Manhattan DA who literally campaigned for office on a pledge to indict the former president.
CNN's Stephen Collison writes, quote, Americans have never seen an ex-president convicted of a crime, and a country already torn apart by bitter political and cultural polarization is likely in for a rocky time. The implications are enormous.
If incumbent presidents or incumbent administrations are going to prosecute former presidents or former incumbents, let's look at some of the examples we could have had. Hillary Clinton, could she have been prosecuted for all those emails, all those confidential emails that were on her personal server, which were in complete violation of the federal securities laws and top secret laws? If the Trump administration wanted to treat her the same way he's being treated now that he's ex-president, she could have been prosecuted. How about Bill Clinton? Could Bill Clinton have been prosecuted for lying to Congress about his situation with Monica Lewinsky? And you could go right down the list. How about Joe Biden? Is he going to be prosecuted once he's no longer president for all of the shameful relationships that he and his son had with the Ukraine and businesses within the Ukraine, businesses within China, where they were reaping tens of millions of dollars in payments for what? Is this what we're going to devolve into, is every time a new president takes office or a new administration comes in, the old administration, they start picking over every nook and cranny and start prosecuting them for crimes? That's what they do in banana republics. It's not what we do in a democracy.
This case has not just been bad in and of itself, but it is destabilizing to the American legal system in the sense that it's like an opening of a Pandora's box or opening of floodgates. And there are calls from conservatives to go after President Biden in a similar fashion. And I think certainly prosecutors in the future who have been reluctant to politicize their offices and frankly disgrace their offices by shredding well-settled norms of prosecution and just going after their opponents, which we see happen regularly in third world countries or in the Middle East or Pakistan, where people don't leave office peacefully. They get prosecuted or blown up. I think that's coming in our country now, thanks to this.
Remember, this is how the Roman Republic fell. It was the lawfare by the Roman insiders against Caesar that caused him to feel desperate. And he brought his army across the Rubicon from Gaul into Rome. And it led to the Civil War and the fall of the Roman Republic. And I'm not saying we're going into a civil war in America, but what this will lead to is a legal tit for tat between the parties going forward, where this political lawfare and election interference, these third world Republican tactics will become normalized, and we'll have the parties indict and prosecute their predecessor, and it's going to lead to the destruction of our country.
Beyond the courtroom and legal consequences, this prosecution has significantly impacted something else, the public perception of Donald Trump, which is reshaping the dynamics of the 2024 election.
The wrongful prosecution of President Trump in this and 3 other cases has had a rebound effect on Democrats, and it is backfiring on them in a big way. He is widely viewed as being persecuted by a rigged and biased and weaponized legal edifice, and that is causing sympathy on the part of millions of Americans who identify with that.
Here's a part of what some of the callers on the popular morning radio program, The Breakfast Club, had to say after the verdict.
I feel like Trump got did dirty, and I don't trust the system at all. After you've been railroaded by this system, and you see that when you walk in the courtroom, they want you to be guilty. You're going to be guilty. I'd rather have a president, right, who's going to be honest and show me that he's the a-hole than have a president who's going to lie to me to try to gas me up to get my vote.
So many rappers are showing support for Trump now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Because now he's got a felony.
Right.
Right. I mean, like, now they realize also he's getting trapped by the system, just like everybody's been rapping about. Being trapped by this system, this bullshit system. And you watch it happen with him.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just talking about this. It's like I don't think they were counting on the black voter being like, hey, they just that guy. That's what they do to us.
While the verdict is being appealed, there are bigger issues at stake. The integrity of the American justice system, the future of our democracy.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Before the trial, there was no question but that this was a prosecution to get Trump. And now that they've got this verdict, as bizarre and as dubious as it is, now that they've got Trump, I think they're going to be sorry they got what they wished for, because I think it's going to backfire on them. I think the American people are smarter than that. They're not going to have the wool pulled over their eyes like that. And I think this kind of corruption at the highest levels of our government and in the most fundamental portions of our government, our criminal justice system, will stink in the nostrils of justice and society, and the public's not going to put up with it.
The people of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump is an embarrassment, a case a tin pot dictatorship would bring against their political opponent. Will justice prevail, or will political agendas corrupt the core of our nation's foundation? Will Bragg's weaponization of justice and Jack Smith's October surprise succeed in influencing the 2024 election? These and many other important questions will be answered in the coming weeks, months, and years. The answers will change the course of history.